Hello, fellow pop culture nerds. Welcome to this week's episode of the Clonestar Podcast. I am your host, Mike Overton, and joining me in my co-host seat this week is my wonderful friend from Ireland, the lovely Show Hurley. Show, how are you doing this week?
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure as always. Now, in a first for us at the Clonestar Podcast, we have a non-Star Trek guest joining us. This week, we're joined by Dave Barclay, who, well, kind of has a pretty insane CV as a puppeteer who's worked on productions such as The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Team America World Police, my absolute favourite kids show of all time, Fraggle Rock, The Muppets, and has worked with the legendary Frank Oz and Jim Henson. His autobiography, chronicling his incredible experiences, which is entitled My Life with Animatronics, Movies, Puppets and Beyond, is releasing this February. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
It's so nice to have another Brit on the show.
Well, I'm a Brit, but these days I live in Burbank, California. So
we skip over that bit. We skip over that bit.
Everyone says I haven't lost my accent, so that's good.
Definitely.
Oh no, you still speak with the BBC level accent, Dave. Absolutely, you could be calling out the Radio Times for all we know with that lovely accent of yours. Dave, you're not a first generation puppeteer. You're actually a second generation puppeteer. Your parents were puppeteers. How did they get into that line of work?
Good question. Yeah, well, they met at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, RADA. As actors, they wanted to be actors. My father had desires to be somebody like Sir Laurence Olivier and do Shakespeare. And then they fell in love, got married, and when I came along, they decided they wanted something that they could do together, because as actors, they were nearly always cast separately. And they said, no, we want to work together. So my father had made puppets when he was a teenager. And in fact, my mother did a small puppet job in between acting jobs when before they got married. And so they decided, well, we'll do a hobby of puppetry. We'll make our own puppet theatre and do their own stories. And they did, and it was incredibly popular. It was very, very successful immediately. And they did everything. So my father designed and sculpted, created all the puppets. My mother dressed the puppets. He designed the puppet theatre, all the props, did all the electrics, did all the audio. They did everything between them. They did all the bookings, the accountancy, everything. So there was the two of them did everything and had a touring puppet company from the early 60s to when they retired in 2000. So they were puppeteers, professional puppeteers, their whole working lives.
And like in terms of, say, you said they did the travelled around and things like that, like was it always just kind of live shows, or did they do anything for like the BBC in terms of, say, radio or kind of TV or anything like that, or was it just all live shows around the country?
It was all live shows around the country. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that set them above a lot of the other companies was that it was always live, and they were great actors, and they really could engage the audience and work the audience really well, where a lot of their contemporaries perhaps were doing things on tape. They recorded it, they had voice actors do the stuff on tape and they'd play it back, and that would work sometimes, but it wasn't the same as when my parents could actually tailor the performance for every audience. And we travelled to Scotland, to Ireland. We went to Galway in '74, the Brendan O'Dowd show. We did pantomimes all over the UK, and then did lots of puppet shows. So I probably did hundreds, if not close to 1,000 performances with my parents as the third puppeteer.
And like growing up, a lot of people would often kind of say, I am not under any circumstances getting involved with what my parents do, because my parents are old and square. I'm young and I'm hip, and I'm not going to get involved in that. Did you, like, how to put it, did you have a choice in getting involved, Dave, or was it really a desire to kind of say, this is actually really cool and interesting and I want to be a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I was about 4 when they started doing all of that, and it was before I went to school. So the initial shows, they took me along, and I had to be inside the puppet theatre with them. So they gave me a job to do. They gave me the opening the curtains, and closing the curtains, which were on the puppet theatre stage, and then they would change the backdrops and some of these side props, and then I'd open up again when it was ready. And so I'd get paid sixpence for that for each show. So I took it very much as a job. I took it very seriously. I had to be silent inside the puppet theatre at that age, and I did. And I think when I was 4, I got my first string puppet. It was one of the toy Pelham puppets that were very popular at that time. And I instantly took to it. I didn't tangle the strings, and when I did, I had the patience to untangle them. And this is like when I was 4 or 5. And so then I became the warm-up act for my parents. So they would put an old vinyl album on a turntable, battery-operated turntable, and I would dance my string puppets to their music, their warm-up music before they started the show. So, so I became very much part of this approach of performing professionally. I remember saying to kids, friends of mine, I would say, I've got to go home and do some more work with my puppets. They said, are you going to be playing with puppets then? I said, no, I'm not playing. I'm working, I took a great umbrage. And it's like, and this is like when I'm 7 or 8. I definitely had this, because I guess I'd got it from my parents, and this, the having to be silent backstage, and the whole theatre, sort of where you had to be very focused, and I was from a young age. I took to it instantly and loved it. And I wanted to be the third puppeteer. But with their initial shows, because they were glove puppets, I was too short. I couldn't reach their proscenium where the puppets were, So it wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 when I'd grown tall enough where I could actually reach the puppeteer in their show. And my father wrote a special, one of the original plays, and created puppet for me, so I could be part of that. So.
And at what point then, Dave, did you kind of say, hang on a second, I actually really enjoy this and I could actually make a living from this?
Well, I mean, I was very much into that certainly when I was sort of just moving into secondary school, I was making my own puppets. And when I was 8, my parents created a puppet theatre for me with a full set of Punch and Judy puppets. That were designed for an 8-year-old to perform. So they're made from lightweight plastic wood. And so I used to do Punch and Judy shows with friends and at school. And so I thought, yeah, I could do this. I could be a puppeteer. And then by the time I think I was about 16, one of my parents' friends, Violet Philpott, who was a well-known puppeteer in the British puppet scene, she offered me the summer season of doing shows in the Royal Parks, the London Royal Parks, where I was a puppeteer. I'd been doing the same sort of things with my parents in the Royal Parks, so it wasn't an unknown sort of production for me, but it was with a different company. And so I started sort of moving away from being just a puppeteer in my parents' show and doing my own. But I was also getting to the point where I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life, because I've been doing it all my life. That's the way it felt. At the grand old age of 16 or 17, I was thinking, no, I'd much rather...
I'm a veteran now. I've done it for so long. I can't be doing this for any longer. Dave, do you still have some of the original puppets and kind of the playhouses and all that? You still do?
Yes, I don't have the puppet theatre anymore. That's long gone. But I have some of the original puppets I made. I have and some of the puppets that actually have one puppet that Violet Philpott made for when I did those shows at 16. So yeah, I've tried to keep a record of all of that. So and there's some photographs of it in my book. So.
Oh, fabulous. And Dave, when you decided then you were going to kind of strike out a bit on your own, was that like, were your parents very supportive of that, or were they saying, no, son, stay with the family business, we're going to take over, it's going to be an absolute glorious thing, don't leave us in this situation?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things that happened was that I got very interested in film special effects makeup because Planet of the Apes came on the TV. Yep. And I loved it. It was science fiction. I love science fiction. And I love the makeups and the stories. So I decided to make 8mm cinefilm versions, home movies of the Planet of the Apes. And I made all the masks, I made all the costumes, the wigs, created the costumes, dyed all the fabrics for that, or did everything, built sort of semi attempts at sets, and we filmed these things in my mid-teens, and I was rather more focused on that and filmmaking than doing my exams. And my dad said, "Oh, you should stop making those 8 films. You'll never get anywhere making those bloody 8 films," he said. But they allowed me to make my own choice. So they would advise me, but they allowed me to do what I wanted, and I was sure I could do both. In fact, my exams were pretty poor. I mean, I had been very good at school and was a good academic student, but because my exams weren't as good as they should have been. But then many years later, when I was chief puppeteer on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I was able to employ my dad, he said he was really glad that I didn't listen to a bloody word he said. So
isn't that always the way though? When you kind of like not surpass your parents, but you bring them into projects, they then become the kind of, oh well, I'm glad you didn't pay any attention to me whatsoever.
Well, in that case, I did. I became the well-known film and TV puppeteer who is now supervising movies, and we were joking about we should perhaps set up a company and call it Dave Barclay and Father. And he loved it. He thought that was brilliant, because it's normally so and so and son or daughter, or whatever. It's like, yeah. So, but yeah, it was. Again, they always supported me 100% in all the crazy things I did. They never stopped me doing any of that stuff, and were always. Sometimes I felt when I was a kid that they were being they overpraised me, because I mean my first attempts at doing the Planet of the Apes masks. I said, "Oh, it's absolutely fantastic," and I'm looking at it. Well, it's not as good as the movies, So it's like, and they said, "Yeah, but you're 15 or something, so that doesn't matter." It's like it's not as good as the movies. Like I want it to be as good as the movies. So I almost got annoyed at them for saying how well I'd done when I knew it wasn't as good as what I was aiming for. So,
Dave, please tell me there's still copies of those Planet of the Apes movies that you made still knocking around.
There are, and there's a Vimeo link at the back of the book to those films. I decided I'd try and because I've got a Vimeo channel which I've had to have for years for when doing show reels and different video bits and pieces to share. So I've put some stuff up there. So.
Dave, if you don't mind, when we publish the episode, we might put a link to the Vimeo page on there as well. Would that be okay?
That would be fine. Yes, definitely.
Fantastic stuff. And Dave, in terms of then say how, like in terms of what you're doing, in terms of where you were going with puppeteering and all that, where did it all kind of change? Like where was the kind of the big, say, change for you in terms of, say, potentially meeting a specific individual that kind of changed the direction of your life?
Right, well, I've been making these 8 films. I wanted to get into... I didn't really want to follow my parents' live theatrical puppetry. I could have done, but I didn't want to. I wanted to get into television and films, and but there was nothing available. There was a show called Rainbow in London, which was Britain's version of Sesame Street, and it's like... Zippy.
Hang on a second.
My good friend Ronnie LaDrew. Yes, and Bungle. But it was like they had the puppeteers. There was no opportunities to get any work there. So, and there's very little sort of work around. So,
Jerry Anderson was probably wrapped up by this point then, wasn't he? Things like Captain Scarlet, Thunderbirds, they would have been long finished, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think Joe 90 and there was one with Stanley Unwin, Secret Service or something. He'd stopped doing that. He did come back in the 80s and did Terrorhawks, but at that point, he wasn't doing any work either. So it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I wasn't doing so well at school, and I decided I needed a gap year. I wanted to take some time off, and And because when I got back, I was going to focus on getting into university, studying sculpture, so that as a sculptor I could get into the film industry. So I was always quite good at modeling, because I've been modeling heads and puppets for all my childhood. So I took the gap year off, and a friend of mine said, well, there's a job going at Hamley's toy store. Hamley's of Regent Street, which is London's most famous toy store, and selling and demonstrating Pelham puppets, which were the little puppets that I puppeteered when I was a kid. So I knew the puppets well. I even knew the owner, Bob Pelham, because I'd met him at one of the puppet conventions with my parents. So I thought, well, yeah, this would be a nice, easy job. It'd be in London. I get to sort of hang out in London, and that will be fine. So I took the job and had a great time doing it. One lunchtime, I'm out at an early lunch, unusually early lunch, and I come back. And the person who was covering for me said, oh, you just missed Mark Hamill. He's just come in and bought a whole bunch of the Pelham puppets for his private collection. And I couldn't believe it. It was just devastating, because I was a massive Star Wars fan. I was a massive Star Trek fan too, but a massive Star Wars fan. And I'd missed the chance to meet Mark Hamill. And I also didn't get the commission from selling the puppets. So that seemed like really terrible. So, and I thought, but the person said that Mark was looking for someone to build a custom carved Darth Vader marionette, a string puppet, for his private collection. And that person had said, well, the guy that's normally here, Dave Barclay, he can do that. So, so I thought, oh, well, wonder if I can write to Mark. So I got in touch with my friend in the mail order department, because she was going to send the puppets to Mark's address in Malibu in the States. And I said, well, could I have the address? And she said, no, it's not allowed. We're not allowed to give out that stuff. But she handed me a little slip of paper. So a letter was written, but I never heard anything back. So I just took it for granted that it was all done and finished. And then I left Hamley's and was wondering what I was going to do as far as trying to maybe get into university. But then one of my friends at Hamley's.
Just to bring back for a second, what's the time difference between when Mark Hamill came into the store when you left the store in terms of finishing up there? I'm just curious how long.
Yeah, he was visiting London in the summer of '78, so it would have been probably September '78, and it would have been more like April, May time, I think, when he came back to start working on Empire Strikes Back. So it would have been like 9 months from when I missed seeing him, and when he came back into Hamleys. And he came back into Hamleys and said he was looking for me, and he wanted me to build the puppet. So he'd remembered. And so a friend of mine contacted me. I got the note that Mark had left, and I got in touch and met up with him and his wife, Mary Lou. And they are a couple of the nicest human beings you could ever meet. I mean, they really are. And they still continue to be after all the success and all the things he's done. He's just a truly lovely man. And he commissioned me to build this Darth Vader marionette, where he and his wife. And so I went away and spent a couple of months building it. It's tough. I'd been building lots of puppets before, but I didn't have to be this precise ever before this time.
I was about to ask Dave, because this is long before the days of the internet and reference magazines and all that. So what were you doing to try and was it just kind of from memory, or did you have something to go off to try and build this Darth Vader doll?
Well, I did have, I had collected lots of the magazines. There were a lot of science fiction magazines and articles. So I got everything I could possibly find and get my hands on and use that as reference. And actually, towards the end of completing it, Mark actually took some Polaroid photographs of details of Vader's, like his belt and everything, that I didn't have really good reference for. So that enabled me to get that better. So he helped me in that. So I've still got those Polaroids. But yeah, I mean, it was carved wooden legs, and I had to try and carve all the details of the leather, wrinkly leather, in the carved wooden legs and everything. So it was crazy. But I finally got it finished, and he invited me along to Elstree Studios, Boreham Wood, which is a big centre for filmmaking, certainly back in the 70s, 80s. Shining was shot there, and Monty Python's Meaning of Life. We did Labyrinth and Roger Rabbit there, and this was Empire Strikes Back, and it was my first time walking into Elstree Studios, and this was like a dream come true. And so I got to see Mark film one of the shots against blue screen. And then he said, would I like to meet Stuart Freeborn? And Stuart is certainly he was the most successful and most famous prosthetic makeup artist in the UK at that time. Yep. Brilliant. He had created the apes for Kubrick's 2001. And that was revolutionary in its time. And Stuart was just a true genius. And so Mark took me along to meet Stuart, who was very busy at the time in his workshop, and I had some photographs of some of the films that I'd made, the ape films, and some of the prosthetic makeups that I'd done on myself. And Stuart said, "Oh yeah, that looks all very good." Yes, he said, "I might be in touch with you next week." And I thought, that's just a very nice way of getting me out of his office, because he was really busy. It's just like, yeah. So I didn't pay any heed, and then went off. But a week later, I got a phone call, and they said, Stuart would like to give you the position of trainee in the special effects makeup department. So suddenly without realizing it, I'm in the studio workshop and working for Stuart on The Empire Strikes Back, all because having had this job at Hamleys selling toy string puppets.
And do you mind me asking, Dave, what was it like when you walked onto the set of The Empire Strikes Back for the first time? You said you watched Mark film against the blue screen. Was that on Hoth, or was that on Dagobah, or was it on Cloud City? Do you remember which part of the movie it was that he was filming?
I think it was one of these. He was doing one of the stunt sequences when he's having the fight just before his hand gets chopped off.
Oh yes,
so that would be Cloud City. Yes, so he was doing that. So because everything's shot completely out of order. Dagobah was the very last thing that was filmed, the whole Yoda sequence, because Stuart Freeborn was still working on Yoda. Yoda was behind schedule, and so they kept filming everything they needed to, and waiting for Yoda to be ready, and he wasn't. So that's one of the reasons I think I got the job, because there was still so much work to do on Yoda, and they hadn't started filming, and they needed more pairs of hands to do all the jobs. So
what did it feel like your very first day reporting for duty, going, oh my God, I'm working in the movies and I'm working on the fucking sequel to Star Wars?
And Star Wars was the biggest movie in history at that point. So I'm working to the sequel of the biggest movie in history. And it's like, right, okay. And my first job...
Wait, Dave, correct question before you go further. What did you say to your father?
I said, I've got myself the job, and he was delighted for me, and he helped me put the night after I was there for the first time, because initially I got there and I thought I was when Mark had originally taken me there, I met this guy who said, "Oh, a lovely carved marionette. We're going to do a marionette of a new character," and that was I think originally planned to be Yoda, and we want someone to carve a body. And legs. We're going to do the hands, feet, and head. And is that something you can do? And I said, yes. It's all right. Well, we'll probably be in touch about that. So, great. So that's what I thought I was going to interview for. So I turn up at the office, very comfortable. I've made lots of marionettes and everything. So I'm hyper confident and everything's great. And it's only when the guy tells me, "Oh, Stuart would like to employ you in the makeup department," and this was yes, I was like internally going, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit," and and he said, "Well, when can you start?" I said, "Well, I'm not working at the moment. I'm unemployed at the point." He said, "All right, well," and this was a Tuesday. He said, "You started yesterday. Go over to Stuart's lab and start working." So literally, it was like I started yesterday, and I'd never done that before or since. And I went straight out from thinking I was going to make this puppet body for a toy. to actually working on the film, and it's like I was devastated. So I was like panicking, and so that evening I put the toolkit together. My dad was very, very proud. I said, "Oh, it's not going to last. It can't last, you know. I'm way so far out of my depth." So but my first job was to sculpt a new top lip for Yoda. I didn't know what Yoda was. I mean, we had just working for Stuart, and he said that the sculpture was approved and it was all molded, made into foam latex. And but when it was put on the skull, which would hold the foam latex in position, it couldn't get the mouth to close because it was sculpted with an open mouth. And they wanted so obviously you can't make the plosive sounds or make it look like he's speaking if the mouth won't close. So rather than resculpt everything, the plan is to take a little plaster copy of the current top lip, and then I would extend it. And Stuart cast up 6 different versions, and it was my job to sculpt 6 different versions that I felt fit of different options for Yoda's extended top lip. So that was my first job. And it's like, and Stuart looked at it. He had a surface texture process that he put on all of them. They got molded. They all came back. They cast them up in foam latex, and he lined them up on the different foam skins and go, oh no, I like that one. So suddenly it's like, wow, okay. Not only now have I been employed, but I'm actually sculpted this little tiny piece that Stuart likes, and it's on the Yoda puppet. So it's like, it was just so, and it went from better. It kept getting better every single day almost when I was there. So
when you were there, like you would have been there for all of the filming of the Dagobah scenes then, I'm guessing, and like you got to meet Frank Oz obviously there then as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, I was initially just in the workshop. Some of my jobs was to take the foam latex out of the molds, clean them, wash them through with pure soap, and then foam latex shrinks about 7%. So one of my sort of daily tasks was to expand it back up to its natural size using chemicals. So I did all of that. So it's very much like just process work and everything. And then we hear that Frank's coming in. So I see him walk past. I didn't really get to meet him. And then before we know it, they're filming. And I wasn't part of the filming initially. So that's Frank, and it's Wendy Midner, Kathy Mullen, and I think maybe Graham Freeborn was involved in bringing Yoda to life. And I was just still doing my work in the workshop, sweeping up and building duplicate mechanical parts. Then suddenly someone was ill on set, one of the puppeteers, and they had to leave, go to hospital or something. And I was told that, well, you need to go down to set and take over, because we need a puppeteer now, this instant. Nobody's available. You're there, so I'm drafted down and on the spot, no rehearsal or anything. That didn't have to audition. So I'm just there. I'm given the eye control, which I knew how it worked because I helped build it. And so then Frank told me what to do. So I'm standing there and working, doing the eyes, and I'm thinking, wow. I'm actually getting to do something on the film, right? Actually filming. It's like, this was amazing. And but my one afternoon, my life is complete. You know? But the following morning, Frank had seen rushes and said, no, I like what you did. I'd like you to stay on the eyes. So suddenly now I'm not sweeping up and cleaning in the workshop. I'm one of the official Yoda puppeteers, working every day from that point onwards, generally performing Yoda's eyes. I did share it with Wendy Midner Froud. We did the eyes together, but I think I did the bulk of the eye work on Yoda. And so when he's doing all this, the closing of the eyes and looking around, so yeah, that's the bit that I was doing. But Frank was very good at describing exactly what he wanted as far as eye movements or blinks. But all the other stuff, I just improvised depending on what shots we were doing.
So what you're saying is that scene when Luke is basically trying to get the X-Wing out of the swamp and Yoda's eyes are kind of completely opening up because he's there, oh my God, the kid might be able to do it. That was all you, Dave, was it?
Yes.
Oh my God. That is absolutely incredible. Incredible stuff.
But then the topper of that was that it took much longer to film Yoda than anyone expected. Frank warned them it would take a while, but it took even longer than Frank thought. And we were behind schedule, and Frank had to go and do another job. So they did something that they never do. They added a Saturday shoot before he left, which the way the unions were back then, that never happened. So this was a big deal. So they added the Saturday shoot, but they still had days of Yoda footage to film. So I thought we would come back when Frank had finished his job. No, the set's got to come down in 2 weeks. So we've got to film the Yoda in the next 2 weeks. So it was decided that Frank would nominate someone to take over. And I thought, well, maybe I can continue doing the eyes for the person who's taking over. And Frank said, no, you're going to be chief puppeteer for Yoda. So suddenly, it's like,
wait a second, hang on, Dave, what age are you at this point?
I'm 19.
Oh my God.
So here's the deep end of the pool. Good luck.
Basically, here's the deep end of the pool. And so he said, you know the sequences, you know the character, you know the intention, because Frank, when we first started, he would act everything out himself as though he was Yoda. And then he would get all the other puppeteers, Kathy, Wendy, and myself, to follow him as he was walking around and exactly mimic him. Do his same walking steps, do the same body turns, the head turns, looking down, the thought. So we got to know the rhythms and the performance of Yoda. So he said, you know all of that. I had been holding the puppet up in between takes for lighting, because Frank's arm, just to try and save Frank's arm. So I would walk the puppet around a little bit to try and match what Frank had done. And he seemed to think, yeah, well, no, you'll be fine. Just be Yoda, he said. So it's like, so suddenly I take over from Yoda. And
were these all new? Were these all new scenes now, Dave, that you're recording, or were you recording scenes that Frank would have done already?
Yes, I'm filling in most of what we did there, the 2 weeks after Frank left. Most of that was filling in the shots that Frank didn't do, because there's multiple angles. So it'd be shots of Mark with Yoda in the background, sometimes over the back of Yoda's head to a close-up of Mark. There was a whole training sequence though when Mark's doing the tumbles and everything that I did. All of those, I filled in all of those shots. There's the big wide shot when the X-Wing's coming out of the water. I'm performing Yoda in that wide shot. And then after a couple of weeks, it was all done.
Sorry, whoa. Are you telling me that the scene when Yoda takes the X-Wing out of the swamp and he's doing that with his hand, that's you?
That's me for the wide shot, yes. When you see the close-up, it's Frank, but when it's me on the wide shot, that's me chief puppeteering Yoda. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. And but then after that, I got to work on Dark Crystal, and it was I think January, February time when I was on Dark Crystal. Frank came up to me and said, "Oh, they're doing an inserts day." On Empire Strikes Back, they're going to shoot Yoda once more. And I said, well, would you like me to do the eyes? And he said, no, you're going to do Yoda again. You know? So, like, what? It's like, yeah, and he said, I'm too busy. And he said, and I saw what you did on the other stuff. It was fine. So so okay, right. So
wait, Dave, I have a question to ask you. You said earlier on, right? When you would do something, your parents would overpraise you from your own perspective, right?
Yes.
When Frank is talking to you, you're saying that Frank is there going, what you were doing was fine. He's not overpraising. He's not saying it was perfect. No. Was that Frank's way of kind of tempering expectations, just kind of saying, yeah, what you're doing is fine, but is that Frank speak for that was actually really good, but Frank just says that was fine?
I don't know, actually. I think probably what it was is that, I mean, to be honest, in my opinion, Frank was the world's greatest puppeteer. And certainly at that time, there was no one, I don't think, who could match him. Jim was a brilliant puppeteer, Jim Henson. And but Frank, with the level of technique and control and being very specific with the performance, I don't think there was anyone better than Frank. So here's me at 19 trying to emulate the world's greatest puppeteer. So I'm never going to do that. So I'm going to try and get away with what I can, do the best I can, and hopefully it won't jar too much. So I think it was fine. And but what Frank was happy was that I was within character. I made sure Yoda stayed in character and would approach Frank's portrayal of Yoda.
So if anyone is watching or listening to this podcast, whatever you were doing at 19 years old, you were not being the puppeteer for Yoda. Whatever your life was, it's not as good as Dave's life, because he was goddamn Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back at 19 years old.
Probably one of the most iconic characters in film.
Yeah, and for me, who wanted to move into doing movies and mechanical puppets that actually didn't exist before Yoda, not only did I get to work on it, I was like lucky to get in as part of the puppet build crew. So I was part of creating Yoda, sculpted his top lip, and then I ended up taking over from Frank as puppeteering. I mean, everyone said, it doesn't get any better than that. It's downhill from now on, you know. And in some ways they're right, you know. In some ways there's no way that I could ever have achieved anything more spectacular in the space of, I think, where I was on Empire for 9 weeks.
I mean, let's face it, what else tops that?
Well, we'll find out in a second before we talk about Return of the Jedi. Like, in terms of, say, like, working with Frank Oz, and obviously you've worked with Jim Henson, so, like, you've been working on things like The Muppets, Fraggle Rock, Labyrinth, as you said, The Dark Crystal, which I absolutely adore, and things like that. How did that then come about, from kind of going from The Empire Strikes Back kind of into working with Jim Henson?
Right, well, again, just lucky that Wendy...
God damn you, Dave. Dave, would you give me the numbers for the lotto? For the love of God, like, no one on earth has as much luck as you have.
No, I mean, it really was lucky because, well, Wendy Midner, who then went on to marry Brian Froud, so she became Wendy Froud, was puppet builder who worked on the original sculpture of Yoda before Stuart did the final version. She also made all the body parts and sculpted the hands and feet of Yoda. But she'd been working on early prototypes of the Gelflings for Dark Crystal. So she was a brilliant, initially a doll maker, but then a fantastic puppet maker. And she said, well, yeah, we were just about to crew up for the Dark Crystal. So she knew that I was a puppeteer and puppet maker. So she gave me a contact number for a lady called Sherry Amott, who I was the very first Brit that she interviewed and got the job. So I was the very first British puppet maker and puppeteer on Dark Crystal. Wow. Because of having worked on Yoda. So, and then I got very soon to meet Jim Henson again. I'd met Jim very briefly on the set of Empire Strikes Back when he came along, and as a practical joke, they switched Yoda for Piggy and Kermit on the Dagobah set. So suddenly Yoda goes down because arrested Frank's arm, and then they roll film, and then up comes Piggy and Kermit and ad-libbing like that. So I got to meet Jim very briefly then, but yeah, got to know Jim quite well because I was one of the very first few British puppeteers who was working with the American puppeteers on puppet builders, I should say.
And Dave, what kind of man was Jim like? We've always got the kind of perception of him being this lovely, warm, gentle giant. Like, is the kind of, is the viewpoint we have of him, is it completely, accurate?
That's the way I always saw him, and the way I always found him. He was, when I think one of the first couple of days, he would say, "Good morning, sir." And I was like, I just turned 20 by then. And
Jesus Christ. Dave, for God's sake, stop referencing your age. Like, I feel like I've thrown my life away. Like, age 20, I was still in college, for God's sake.
Yeah, well, my plan would have been to be in university learning sculpture, but instead I was actually I ended up sculpting all the Mystic Feet for that, and sculpting the Urskex and half of the Skeksis on Dark Crystal. So, but yeah, so I got to meet him. He was definitely a visionary. He loved having creative people and setting up an environment where they would thrive. He really was. He was very supportive of everybody, and very much like Kermit, trying to manage the crazies that were the Muppets, all these different crazy people who had brilliant things to offer, but weren't always easy to manage. That was Jim in real life. He did that with all the creative people around him. He was able to get the best out of everyone. Everyone wanted to give 110% for Jim, and Jim was always very, very gentle and quiet. He never lost his temper. I remember there was the thing that I learned very quickly that was eventually introduced to some of the newer builders and creative people on Dark Crystal. Jim would come by and someone would show him what they were doing, and Jim would go, "Oh, that's cute," and all the people that knew Jim would go, oh my god, oh my god, oh god," because that would be that Jim didn't like it, but he would say it was cute. And like so, and the newbies would go, "Oh, that's great, Jim loved it," and they go, No, Jim didn't love it at all. No, quite the opposite. So, but that was Jim. He didn't blow his top. He didn't say anything if it was terrible. He would have a very positive way of even saying he didn't like it. So.
Dave, when you look back on kind of this era of, say, like the late 70s, early 80s, with the productions that you worked on and things like that, like from, say I was a kid of the 80s, so growing up with those marionette puppets, the things like in Labyrinth, things like the Dark Crystal, Yoda, and things like that, would you look at it and say it was the golden age of puppeteering in Hollywood at the time? Was it ever better than it was at that point in the 80s?
I don't think so. Not for me, and I don't think for all my colleagues. And for me, I was, as I said earlier, I wanted to get into this world that actually didn't exist when I started, because Yoda was the first. So I got on the first rung of the first step of the ladder, and then just kept developing and growing and doing it. So yeah, I mean, by the time we got through a handful of productions, we were the team of people, builders and performers, who had unique experiences because there wasn't anyone else around. So we just kept moving on from one project to another project to another project. It was like a small family group of people. And in fact, I've never had an agent. So I've never had someone looking to get me work. So I've always just had people call me up and say, "David, we've got this project. Would you like to do it?" And so, and that's the way that worked. So from Dark Crystal, got to work on Return of the Jedi, got to go back to Henson's, got to work on Labyrinth. From that, got to work on Little Shop of Horrors because Frank was directing. Frank asked me to be part of that. And then some of the people that I worked with, producers, asked me to work on Roger Rabbit. And then the special effects guy asked me to work on Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Which was a crazy and amazing film. So for that period of time, from 79 to basically 89, it was just like non-stop. It was amazing. But then, of course, Mrs. Thatcher changed all the tax rules, and all the American productions fled to Canada and Australia. So for a number of years, there were no big Hollywood movies being made in the UK.
Dave, I want to bring it back for a second. When was the first time you saw The Empire Strikes Back then on the big screen? And what was your reaction to looking at the scenes going, "Jesus Christ, that's me. That's also me. That's me as well there in that scene"?
Well, yes. The interesting thing is what Frank insisted that all the puppeteers go to rushes. And rushes is when they would show the film the next morning. So you'd do the day's filming, they'd have it processed overnight, and it would always be silent because they hadn't had time to synchronize the sound up with the film. So you'd watch it just purely silent and see if the visuals were working. So I got to see every single shot that I worked on individually, but I hadn't seen it obviously assembled. Got to see the crew screening of Empire Strikes Back. That would have been 1980, and I think it was not May the 4th be with you, but I think it was May the 3rd that actually saw it. And so, they had just got the rough non-color balanced shot of the Tauntauns. So that suddenly jumped out as it came in for the crew screening. It was only just coming in, the go motion stuff from Phil Tippett. And so watched through the film, and I was blown away. And one of the shots that I did, the only real close-up that I did as chief puppeteer of Yoda, was on the day of inserts. and that's when Yoda is standing on Mark Hamill's feet, and he says concentrate and falls off as Mark starts, as Luke drops all the rocks and everything, and that shot that I did made it into the film, and I was like, wow, my big close-up has made it into the film. So
you just sit there going, yep, nailed that.
yeah, it was like wow, this is fantastic. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I didn't actually get a on-screen credit on Empire, because they were even doing less credits then than they did even a year or two later.
And were you brought back then for Return of the Jedi from scratch, or were you only kind of brought on, say, as production was kind of going on? Because obviously you were involved in our good friend Jabba the Hutt, who I can see over your right shoulder. Yes. So I'm just curious, were you brought on straight away?
I was, after Dark Crystal wrapped and all the 500 crew were let go, because everyone's freelance, Jim asked myself and Lyle to stay on at the Jim Henson Creature Shop for the promotion of Dark Crystal and to do some research and development for what would become later Labyrinth. So suddenly, rather than trying to find a job, I had this long-term job working at the Creature Shop. So I got a call initially from Stuart Freeborn saying he's got a new character being built, Jabba the Hutt, and would I supervise the build? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm contracted to Jim Henson. I can't break the contract. I had a whole load of stuff to do that I'd absolutely promised to do over the period when the build had to start. I said, I can't drop this. I'm really sorry, Stuart. And I felt devastated. I had turned down working on Star Wars again.
David, you were 22 at this point, right?
Yes.
Jesus Christ. 22 years old, supervised Jabba the Hutt, like, good Lord, this is incredible.
So I said, no, sorry. And so admittedly, I was like, really like saddened and a bit depressed that I had turned down the next Star Wars film. And so, but then a few weeks later, Stuart called back at the Henson Creature Shop saying, all right, David, would you like to be chief puppeteer for Jabba? And so it's like, yes, I'd love to be chief puppeteer for Lucas's new villain. And so I said, but I am working for Jim Henson, as you know. I said, but I'll speak to Jim and see if he will release me for those days filming Jabba. So I said to Jim, I explained it. You probably had been told anyway in advance. And he said, well, as long as I cleared the work that I'd promised to do for the promotion of Dark Crystal, then he would release me for doing the shoot days on Jabba. And so I said, yeah, absolutely. So I got to basically have my cake and eat it. I was being employed full-time at Jim Henson's, and then I got to be chief puppeteer for Jabba. So yeah, I mean, I had to work sort of like 7 days a week, up to like 14 hours a day to clear the work, but that was nothing. So I was a little tired on the first day of rehearsals. But
how many days in total were you filming Jabba then?
Jabba was probably only 2 or 3 weeks, I think. I mean, I have written it down, but I can't bring it to mind. We had supposedly 2 weeks of rehearsal, and that ended up being about 8 hours over the 2 weeks. 8 to 10 hours, because again, they were building a character that no one had ever built before. They were trying to push the technology to its absolute max, really push the envelope in what was possible. And you never have enough time when you're building these things to do it leisurely. It's always a crazy kick, bollock and scramble, as we would say. And so finally it's ready, but basically just when we start filming. So yeah, so I was able to choose my co-puppeteer who's going to be inside Jabba with me, and that was good friend Toby Philpott, who was also on Dark Crystal, and we had worked together on that. So we had a shorthand of how to describe how we would work, and we'd just come off of 6 months filming on the Dark Crystal, so we were really sort of physically and mentally sort of focused on bringing characters to life. So but yeah, it was I was just offered would I like it, and I said yes. Didn't have to audition.
And Dave, say, as time has gone by, we spoke about the golden age between, say, 79 and 89. How did you feel? I know what you said about Thatcher's government changing it and everything kind of moving and things like that. How did you feel that the industry of puppeteering changed then, especially, say, like with 93 and you talk about, say, you know, the arrival of Jurassic Park and CGI, and a lot of movie studios were trying to push CGI before it was ready for what, you know, it was actually needed for and all that. Do you think that had an impact on, say, puppeteering, animatronics, and things like that, say, in the 90s specifically?
I think so. Yeah, I think it did. I remember chatting with Lyle Conway, just genius, one of the world's best animatronic effects supervisors. And he was the guy who created all the Audrey 2 plants for Little Shop of Horrors. Phenomenal guy. And we were talking about it at that time, saying, well, we'll be lucky if there's any animatronics by 1990. The truth of the matter is there were still animatronics 10, 15 years later for certain projects. But I think the general rule of thumb because the only way you could do a creature like Jabba or Yoda in real time would be animatronics. I mean, you could do stop motion, and I know Phil Tippett was using Go Motion and stop motion potentially for Jurassic Park, but they replaced that with the CG animation with animatronics from Stan Winston, and I thought that actually was a good blend. You're using the animatronics for the direct interaction, the right lighting, all the actors being involved, and then using computer animation for the shots that really you couldn't do with puppets or animatronics. So
yeah, you wouldn't be able to do the T-Rex running after a Jeep with animatronics, could you?
You could, but it would be incredibly expensive, very difficult, and even back then I don't think you could have removed all the rigs to make it work properly, because they did build a full-size dinosaur, which was amazing. I mean, I think the work that Stan and the team did on that, I mean, they did a phenomenal job on that. But it's yeah, so it was again using the tools for their best in each of the shots. So I think there was a while when that was happening, you know, where if an animatronic would do it better, then use the animatronic. And but if it was a certain thing that the animatronics or puppets couldn't do particularly well, then it was a good use of the CG technology. But clearly, it became more of a tool as the time got on for production, where studios and directors wouldn't have to think about the effects, wouldn't have to think about, let's say, the dinosaur. Oh, we'll do that in post. We'll just worry about the actors and we'll fix it later in post. So it meant that they didn't have to spend that extra time that it took to film Yoda or Jabba or any of the creatures. They could get through the production more quickly and play around with the edits later and work out what they wanted to do afterwards. And in a way, it made it easy for them, but I think for a number of films, it made for sloppy filmmaking because they didn't integrate it as well as they could have done. Some of the films of that time, it just doesn't work for me. I mean, but then you see, it wouldn't do because I love puppetry and I love animatronics. So the CG, the bad CG, always took me out of the movie.
And before I go a bit further into the future, Mike, I'm not going to let you pass up an opportunity to ask a few questions about your favorite show in the whole wide world.
What, Fraggle Rock?
Yes.
I tell you what, do you know what? When Apple said that they were redoing Fraggle Rock, I got very nervous because I thought, oh, are they going to keep it true to the original? Are they going to do it with actual puppets, or is it going to be all god-awful CGI? And I was glad that they did it with actual puppets, but yes. I actually went back and found the old some old DVDs I had of Fraggle Rock the other day, a couple of weeks ago.
Fantastic.
So I need to go and rewatch them because I haven't watched Fraggle Rock for probably 20 years.
Right.
Because it used to be on it was BBC Two then.
I thought it was ITV, but
was it ITV? Was it BBC? Oh, you got me doubting myself.
TVS. Now. Yeah, we did the British versions through TVS, which was ITV.
Which was ITV. Yes, you're right. It was on Channel 3.
Yeah.
on I think it was Saturday mornings, Fraggle Rock on
I
ITV.
think it was, yeah.
I'd love
No,
that.
it was amazing. I mean, because it was after Dark Crystal when I was asked to stay on with Lyle to do the promotion and R&D that I first saw the pilot episode, 30-minute work week,
Right.
for Fraggle Rock. And Jim was very clever. He knew he had, 12 or 13 episodes to do. So he started with an episode in the middle because he thought it will take a little while to ramp up and get everything working for the very first broadcast episode. So the 30-minute work week, which was buried in the middle of the series, was the first show, and it had some issues and problems, and they were working on it, and we were seeing some of the edits. But I watched it because the producer Duncan Kenworthy showed it to Lyle and I and wanted our opinion. And I said, I love Sprocket. Sprocket's my favorite by far. I said, I love the fact he doesn't have words.
Yep.
And he's kind of a little bit leaning towards more realistic animatronics rather than the big sort of Muppety Fraggle performances.
Yep.
And I love the fact he's got this little eyebrow mechanism. And I said,
and
he doesn't speak.
Sprocket's eyebrows. It's just Sprocket's eyebrows. They're just
yeah. And I thought this is genius. I love it. And I said, this is the sort of thing I would love to perform. I said, this is great. He said, and unbeknownst to me, Jim had planned international co-productions of Fraggle Rock, where they would dub the Fraggle world, because it's just open and closed mouths, into the different foreign languages. But of course, with the human actor, that wouldn't really work. So his plan was to refilm Doc and Sprocket around the world, and with a local actor from that country. So in England, it started off being Fulton Mackay with Sprocket. In France, it was Michel Robin, and Sprocket was called Croquette. And in Germany, it was an exact copy of the original American show, which was filmed in Canada, that Steve Whitmire performed Sprocket. But the German actor was called Hans Helmut Dickhoff.
Can't get more German sounding than that. Like
we just called him Dickie. But yeah, and so we reshot every single because there were like 3 or 4 segments of Doc and Sprocket throughout the show. It was Captain and Sprocket with Fulton, and so we refilmed those in England. We filmed the ones in France and in Germany, in France and Germany, and so I got to do hundreds of different versions of Sprocket, but the German versions wanted an exact copy of Steve's performance and an exact shot-by-shot breakdown of the entire segment. So they would match cameras to. They said the original's perfect. We don't want to change it. So that was the German mindset. French said, "Oh no! It needs to be much more." So we had a massive set in France, and he was a chef. And we were cooking, and it was really cartoony and big over the top, very different to the original Canadian performance that Steve did. And then in England, it was even more realistic than the Canadian version. Sprocket had to be a little bit more like a real dog. And it was with Fulton Mackay, who gave it a much more of a serious note to it, although he was an absolute delight. I mentioned it that I would like to do Sprocket, and careful what you wish for, because I got to do Sprocket for like 5-6 years in multiple language. I could bark in different languages.
I think other than Sprocket, it has to be the Doozers.
Yes.
I love the Doozers. They were so tiny, and Adam Savage, about, I want to say 18 months ago, went to Jim Henson's Creature Shop and got to see how they did it back then and how they're doing it now.
Yes,
and it's really fascinating. And the old animatronics that they used for the Doozers were incredible. They kind of almost were like what's what I'm trying to think of the word now. No, it's escaped me.
No, they were great. I mean, and they a couple of really
that's the word I was thinking of. They just look really low tech, really simple, but they worked so perfectly.
Yeah, well, the Doozers were like built again as a puppet builder. I was very interested in that too. They were two kinds of versions of the Doozers. One was basically a direct linkage rod puppets, so they have little strings and everything to move the heads around on little sticks, and you control it with little rods and everything. Then they had the fully radio control versions, which were all servo driven, and often the servos would be in the trucks that they would drive around.
Yep.
So then they would run all the movements to the heads through little cables. So so they combined the two different techniques to create the ability to see Doozers all over everywhere, and it was great. So
and people now who have never seen or heard of Fraggle Rock are going, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yes. Well, the good news is though that the new version is on Apple, and I just recently chatted with my very dear friend Karen Prell, who's Red Fraggle. I mean, I've known Karen since the early 80s, and we've done lots of movies together and lots of shows together. She's brilliant. I'm so glad she's back doing Red Fraggle because she's phenomenal. Her performance, just like, she's just the best. And I'm so glad that she's able to do it because she also works for one of the world's leading video game companies, and they allow her to take time off to go and do the Fraggles because they're big fans of Fraggles too. So yeah, she's amazing, and I'm glad she's been able to get back and do that. So
yeah, because Karen's got quite an incredible career herself, isn't she? Because I think it's Valve. I think it's who she works for.
It is Valve. Yeah,
Valve. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's been involved in that for years, and she was an animator at Pixar. Well, interestingly enough, she, Mike Quinn, and I, we had our animatronic company in the UK in the 90s, and we went along to one of the very first computer graphics expos in London, in Wembley, and was headhunted by Ed Catmull from Pixar. He's one of the guys, the founders of Pixar, and offered us jobs there. I turned the job down, and Karen and Mike went out to become animators at Pixar. So that's where her love of animation. But when I first met her, she was saying, well, she was either going to be a Disney animator or a puppeteer for Jim Henson. This is before she got any jobs at all. That was her two main aims of what she was going to do. And she became a Muppeteer first. So
Muppeteer, I love that word. But yeah, so Fraggle Rock. If you haven't heard of it, go find it because it's brilliant. Especially the theme tune. I love that theme tune.
Yeah.
And Dave, do you still stay in touch with Frank Oz? I'm just curious.
Not so much as I used to. Yeah, because he's on the east coast of the States, and I'm in Burbank, which is the West Coast. But yeah, we've been in touch recently particularly because of the book. Is that I wanted to have a couple of photographs of me and Frank in the book, and obviously you have to get permission. So I wrote to him and asked him. And typically, I know from previous experience and other information that Frank and Jim were never people who liked to really show off behind the scenes magic of Muppets. I mean, they did from time to time, but they weren't really. It's not something that interested them. They wanted to keep that the magic secret, really. And so typically, Frank doesn't like to approve behind the scenes photographs of Yoda because it's not really the sort of thing that he feels happy with. But he said, but because it was me, he would approve the photographs with him and me in. So it was just lovely, just so wonderful. He was such an amazing influence and inspiration and mentor back in the day, because what with all the stuff initially with Yoda, and then of course he was directing Dark Crystal, and I helped build all the puppets that he was performing on Dark Crystal. So I did all the fittings for the grips, so his hands would have to go in. So I was dealing with him pretty much every single day, and then I was able to perform the facial expressions on like the Skeksis and Aughra for him. So yeah, so it was amazing of time. And then he asked me to be part of Little Shop of Horrors and be the upper lip. No, the lower lip of Audrey too, and so it was. He was just again, amazing performer, amazing person, and so generous with all his support over the years, and continues to this day.
And Dave, one production I have to ask you about, because I remember when it came out and I was, there was kind of a lot of eyebrows raised going, will this be any good? And I was convinced it'd be brilliant, and I was totally right, is Team America World Police, because when they said it'd be a marionette movie, I was there going, because it was the two lads from South Park, I said, this is going to be absolutely fucking fantastic. And it is. And it's still to this day, it's absolutely fantastic. How did that come about for you?
Well, I was actually working on another project for the bulk of Team America when that was being filmed. So when they were trying to get the core performers, I wasn't available. So I thought, oh well, I've missed the opportunity because I built marionettes for Jim Henson. I did all the marionette work on Roger Rabbit and on many other films. And I thought, well, this could be like the perfect film for me. But I was already contracted, so I couldn't be involved either in the build or in the initial performing team. But then I found that I had a couple of weeks free from the other job. And puppet coordinator is a very good friend of mine, Kevin Carlson. And Kevin said, hey, David, why don't you come along and do some days on Team America? And I said, yeah, why not? That would be lovely. I'd love to see what's going on. So I went along, and I think most of the LA puppeteers who are on it, most of them knew me from my supervising role, because I was animatronic effects supervisor on a number of films for the Creature Shop. And so I think they thought I was just someone who delegated and perhaps was a bit of an engineer.
And then you get the sleeves rolled up to get in and say, I'll show you kids how this is actually done here now.
Yeah, so when I was put up on, because they typically, somebody like me would have been put on the radio control boxes to control the faces. But then I'm up the ladder, up into the bridges where all the marionettes are, and everyone's going, why, what's Dave Barclay doing up in the bridges, And I'm standing next to one of America's famous and brilliant puppeteers, Tony Urbano. He's brilliant. And Tony knew me from Henson's, but I didn't know my history. So and he's looking at me a little perplexed that I'm going to be doing this marionette. So do the rehearsal, and I walk my puppet from A to B and come back. And I said, oh, yeah, actually works all right. And he said, well, how did you do that so professionally? And I said, oh, well, I started marionettes when I was second generation puppeteer. And he said, of course you are. And then that was it. We had a wonderful day after that point. So yeah, it's but I probably hadn't operated a marionette in probably 15 years before then, so I was probably quite rusty, but it was still nice to actually get back and puppeteer a string puppet again on a film. So yeah, I did a few days there.
What were some of the scenes that you filmed, do you remember, Dave?
I remember filming the London scene, which I thought was absolutely perfect, with a big explosion. And the fascinating thing is that I was there for a few days, and I think nearly every day that I was there happened to line up with when the documentary film crew were there. So there's behind the scenes that comes with the DVD, and I'm all over it. And I was only there for a few days, where some of the puppeteers who were there for the entire shoot, you don't see them whatsoever. So they were a bit pissed off that there's why is Dave Barclay all over this the documentary when he was only there for a few days?
Perfect timing.
But no, I had a great time.
I've got the DVD downstairs, so I'm going to have to drag that out now and have a watch of that at some point as well. And Dave, I was just checking out as well, leading up to this, have you made your own independent film recently?
I have, yeah, sort of trying to emulate some of the stuff I did as a kid with my Super 8 and Standard 8 cine films. When I was a kid, I loved one of my parents' puppet plays called The Ice King. And it was a fantasy adventure that had fantastic creatures in it and everything. And I loved it. It was my favorite of all their shows. And I was always saying for many, many years, I've got to make this into a film. And when I sort of hit 50, I was thinking, well, I still haven't done it. It's like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And
sorry, can I just interject as well? And I have to do the math on this. when Dave hit 50, he still had 46 years of experience in the industry. So just remember that. He could have retired 20 times over by now, and he was still going at only 50 years old.
Yes. So I was like, oh well, I'm now. If I don't do it now, I'll probably never do it. So I started out writing scripts and getting everything moving, trying to convert their original puppet play, which had a lot of audience interaction, which obviously wouldn't work on a film, trying to turn it into a script that would work for a film, and looking at how I could do it. And I decided in the end I was going to do animatronics for all the close-ups of the puppet characters, of all the characters. But I looked at I think it was just to buy the motors was going to be over $200,000. And I thought, no, I don't really have that sitting because you make okay money as a puppeteer, but you're not wealthy. So it's like, oh, I can't afford that. So what am I going to do? I thought, well, and I was going to do motion capture for the wide shots again, because I just couldn't afford to fully fund like a multi-million-dollar film. So I thought, well, I'll do the whole thing, motion capture. So I actually built my own computers to run the motion capture and do the rendering. I actually used part of this studio here to do the motion capture, and ended up creating an 85-minute motion capture animated film that I did everything myself.
Oh my!
I created all the characters, I sculpted them all, I rigged them all, I learned how to use all the animation software, I set up a real-time animation studio so that we could see ourselves working in real time. Because one of the issues back then, because I started in 2010, people would do the motion capture, they'd add it to the creature and it wouldn't move properly. So what I did is I connected the motion capture to the creature and saw the performances all around the studio. So you could adapt your body to make the creature work right, which is what you do as a puppeteer.
Yeah.
So I used the same mindset of puppeteering in the body performances to bring these characters to life. And then, so we captured, I used my puppeteer friends as the performers. And after like 14, 15 years, had all the footage together and edited it together. But the catch is, of course, I never had the money really to finish the visuals to a full professional standard. So it's I don't know if I can ever get it released. I think I'll probably end up just releasing so people can see this quirky, crazy project that I did all on my own over 14, 15 years.
And what do you call it then, Dave?
It's now called Maldrix, which is the name of the Ice King's servant, which is really the true story of the film. So yes, it's fun. It's 85 minutes. It's a kids' movie. And I'm very proud I did it. And it's an homage to my parents. My dad is the voice for the Ice King, and my mum is the voice for Marshy. And so, and I do one of the voice characters in there too. So it's a Barclay homage to their original puppet plays, and they were delighted to see it. They didn't see it 100% finished, but I think it was about 85% before they both passed. So they got to see it pretty much done. So,
well, Dave, we hope you do get a chance to release it. I'd really, really love to see that. If you do get a chance to put it out there, it'd be absolutely fantastic to watch it. Dave, you've written this book. Why did you decide now to write it? Because, you're still a very young man, but you've got 400 years of experience in you. So I'm just curious, what kind of possessed you to say, I'm going to write a book and, go through all these wonderful movies and productions that I worked on?
Well, originally it came from a suggestion from a good friend of mine, great artist and writer, Murty Schofield. And he said, Dave, you've had all these stories over the years, and you're the only person who can actually put them down, write them down. So you really need to sort of do that. He said, if only for your granddaughters, So, and I thought, well, yeah, he's got a point. But I was always busy. There was always work to do. And I felt I needed a window to do it. So COVID came along, and I didn't do it because I didn't want to do it during COVID. And so, but then there was a period a couple of years ago where it just seemed there was like a 4 or 5 month window where I could focus on it. And I thought, this is the time to do it, because I wasn't quite sure how would I do this. It's like I'd spent a year or two working on script writing, learning how to write a movie script for Muldrix. And so I got used to the whole process of writing and enjoyed the process. So I thought, but yeah, how do I do this book? And I thought, there's so many stories. I could just write a book on maybe just Empire Strikes Back, and just people would be bored halfway through. So I thought, well, now I've got to find something that, some kind of approach. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I've got loads of photographs, and the idea is I take a single photograph and tell a story that relates to that photograph. So, instance, this is the book. And so every single chapter has these masses of photographs in it. So all the way through my career. So basically, each story and each part is relating to these different photographs. And so there's probably like a couple of 100, 200, 300 photographs in there. Wow. But the aim was to use the stories linked to the images, so you could exactly see what I'm talking about. Rather than just having the book with a few pages in the middle, which nearly all autobiographies do, I wanted to be different and more difficult.
Dave, when you were doing it, like, a process like this is not going to be easy for someone to kind of commit their life to a book and things like that. Did you learn something about yourself as you were putting this book together?
I really did. I look back and because so much when I was 19, 20, I just took it in my stride. This was just what happened to me, and I'm just trying to keep going with it. I got married, we had kids, so there was just this acceptance of this is life, this is what is happening. And I didn't initially. I look back and I think, I can't believe how incredibly lucky I've been and getting all these things that lined up, but also just how focused I was and how dedicated to the performance arts and animatronics and engineering and all of that. And that just, I look back and think, to a degree, careful what you wish for, because it will come true. And because it never came true the way I expected it to, but it nearly always did. If I really, really wished for something, I would somehow it seemed to happen, seemed to come about. So I just thought, I've had a very lucky and happy career, but I have really put all my efforts into making that happen.
And when you wrote the book, Dave, was there any kind of memories that you'd actually almost forgotten about or had completely forgotten about? Because obviously you would have been speaking to people to kind of, remember certain things and stories and all that. Was there anything that was kind of brought back to you and you were thinking, oh my God, I forgot that. I forgot being a part of that. I forgot this person, that person, or this event or something like that? Yes,
indeed. I mean, that happened to a reasonable extent through most of the things. The further I got into it, then it opened up different ideas. I remember I worked on a film, The Never-Ending Story 3, that was filmed in Berlin. It's not a very good film.
Is that why you forgot it, Dave? Because it wasn't the best of Never-Ending Story?
No, it was shot in Berlin, and on location. It was a joy because the crew that were there, the people that I was working with, were fantastic people, and we had the best of times there. But the actual film, the script was not good, and it's like, oh my God. So, but it was a really pleasant experience being there with everyone. But the animatronics weren't. They were having some problems with the animatronics, and there was a walking Falcor, which was the big flying dog character in there, and it's supposed to walk down the street in a Chinese New Year celebration. And they got hundreds of extras. Again, this is all before CG. You couldn't add them in, so they had hundreds of extras. All the local Asian people were all there. Everyone who could possibly fit into the scene were there. And we were about to shoot in the night, and the mechanisms all broke on the legs. So the Falcor couldn't walk along. So they decided, well, what are we going to do? So the simple solution was to actually puppeteer the legs. So they took the motors off, and we bolted on black pieces of steel to the bottoms of the legs. And then we were dressed up to look like we were Chinese, which was just hysterical. absolutely hysterical, and it was just not. We couldn't believe that it was just this horrendous attempt at trying to fit in, but it was a really wide shot, and nobody really could see us. So we were nonchalantly walking next to Falcon, and we were making the legs move as we were walking along. No, and the shot was like miles away, and for the longest time. There was no photographic proof, but finally,
oh my god! Oh, geez.
There's me, Rick Lyon, and William Todd Jones in our costumes, and it's just like there's proof. There's proof. It actually did exist.
There's
it's not some weird fantasy.
And Dave, the book is out next month, isn't that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And at the moment, then, in terms of where will people be able to get it?
Well, at the moment, it's there's not plans for it to be directly released in the UK, but it is available through Cool Water's website, and so they can ship it anywhere in the world. And Cool Waters is my friend Derek that I've known for years. He organises all my conventions, so when I go to a convention, he does that all for me, and which is lovely. And so, a link to Cool Waters Productions will get anyone. And at the moment, he's going to do a pre-release version of the book with, I think, autographed 8x10, as well as I can personally sign every book individually. So, because that's the thing that I like. I mean, I could just, I guess, have put it out on an ebook, but I'd much rather have a direct connection with somebody and be able to either talk to them directly or write their name in it and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
I have the list of inclusions here, so it will come with obviously the book, which is signed, an 8x10, and a signed 11x17 poster of your film.
Of Mordric's, right?
Mordric's, correct.
Yeah.
And Dave, what we'll do is we'll make sure when we advertise the episode, we have all these links put in there as well.
Links
advertising
will be in the
book
video description.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
Mike, we normally have a last question for our guests, which we can't ask Dave because he's our first non-Star Trek guest, so we have to think of a new question to ask Dave in this situation.
I've got one. Here we go. Dave Barclay, what does puppeteering mean to you?
What does puppeteering mean to me? Well, it's my entire life. It started as a child, and even though for a little while I was wondering, should I become a makeup artist because of Stuart Freeborn?
Right, okay.
At the end of Empire, I went to see Stuart, and he said he thought that although I could be a decent makeup artist, my skills were more in animatronics, and that I should follow that path. So he gave me that advice, and I thought it was good advice, and I've stuck to it. So, I mean, I've built pretty much any kind of puppet and animatronic that you can imagine. I've also built secretly, as it were, for the American theme parks. I've built animatronics for them. But again, I'm under non-disclosures for all of those guys, so I can't ever talk about it. But yeah, no, so I've built from like state-of-the-art animatronics. They're using the most amazing motors and electronic systems down to the very simplest of hand puppets and sock puppets. So it's what I love, and I decided that's what I would do for my life, and that's what I've done.
Dave, my last question for you is this. In all the movies that you would have seen over the years and things like that, what's the one production you missed out on that you wish you could have taken part in?
Oh, that's interesting. What?
Star Trek, obviously.
Yes, exactly.
I do think I mentioned that with somebody else that my friend Misha Sisti, he was inside the Ninja Turtle costumes. He was Michelangelo, and he's a brilliant puppeteer. I've worked with him for many, many years. But he was a Ferengi, so it's like he got a chance to be in the Star Trek world, and it would have been nice to do that. I would love to have transitioned to do both. But it seems that Star Trek is the one that I haven't yet done, so maybe I could.
never say never.
That's true, yeah, because I mean, just like the Star Wars world is continuing, so is Star Trek. So maybe I'll just have to try and see. I mean, I know Doug Jones very well. He's a dear friend, and yeah, maybe I can ask him, does he know anyone who might be able to get me some work on Star Trek?
I love Doug Jones.
He's just one of the nicest people you can meet. Most of the people I've worked with have been, so I'm just so lucky.
Well, I think, look, Dave, you've had an incredible career. Thank you so much for giving up your valuable time to talk to us. A huge thank you to Derek and the cool guys over at Cool Water Productions for setting this up for us as well. Link for the book and pre-order will be in the video description and the podcast description. But until next time, I don't really know how to end this, but we'll go with live long and prosper, as we always do.
Live long and prosper. I absolutely love that. Yeah.